So, usually when we talk about measuring things, right? Like in our actual physical world.
Yeah, like distance or weight, things like that.
Exactly. There's this expectation of just, well, absolute precision. Comforting precision, really.
Right, because you can see it.
Yeah, you place a bag of apples on a scale, and the digital display reads exactly 3 pounds. And that's just an undeniable objective fact.
2 pounds is 3 pounds.
Right. It's clean. It's binary. And I think we inherently crave that visible metric, you know, because it makes the world feel safe. It makes it feel predictable.
Oh, absolutely. We love a concrete number.
But, and this is what we're getting into today, the moment you step into the landscape of human potential, of personal ambition, or our own internal timelines, suddenly that precision scale is completely shattered.
It really is. It just falls apart.
Yeah, and we welcome you to this deep dive today, by the way, because we are looking at this diagnostic landscape of age and opportunity that is, honestly, entirely fabricated.
It is the absolute definition of a psychological mirage.
A mirage, yeah. Our source material today is a fascinating transcript called "It Is Never Too Late: The Art of Life Transformation." And our mission for you listening right now is to deconstruct these self-limiting beliefs.
Because we treat our internal timeline as if it operates under the strict laws of physics.
Right.
When in reality, it's a fluid, highly subjective construct.
Completely subjective.
And this belief that, it is too late to change course or start something new, it's perhaps the most universally paralyzing myth in modern psychology today.
Which is wild, but I think the most startling part of this phenomenon isn't even that older individuals feel it.
No, it's how early the trap actually snaps shut.
Exactly. I mean, let's look at that incredibly striking example from the text.
The piano player.
Yeah. So there's this individual in the source material who harbored this profound ambition to learn how to play the piano.
Right, a really strong desire.
But they deliberately abandoned the idea entirely. And not because they couldn't afford a piano or didn't have the time.
No, it was purely psychological.
Right. Because they had convinced themselves that they were, quote unquote, past the prime age for learning an instrument.
They explicitly stated that piano is for the young.
And this person, guess how old they were?
It's hard to believe.
28 years old.
28!
That is the part that just stops you dead in your tracks. 28.
Because when you look at the raw biological reality,
right, objectively speaking,
a 28-year-old is at the absolute peak of neuroplasticity.
Yeah, their cognitive endurance, their physical capability, it's objectively young.
Very young. Yet their conviction that the window had completely closed was absolute.
It really exposes how we use age as this convenient, almost socially acceptable scapegoat to just remain inert.
It's an excuse.
Yeah. By declaring a pursuit, like playing the piano as being exclusively for the young, we grant ourselves full psychological permission to not even make an attempt.
We let ourselves completely off the hook.
We do, but why? What's the underlying mechanism there?
Well, it's ego preservation, fundamentally.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
So, the adult ego is profoundly terrified of the vulnerability required to be a beginner.
Oh, yeah. Being bad at something is awful.
Right. Think about how a child learns to walk or play. They fall down, they mash the keys, and make discordant noises on a keyboard.
And they just laugh.
Exactly. They look foolish, and they don't care at all. Their ego hasn't yet calcified around a specific identity of competence.
That makes sense.
But by the time we reach our late 20s, our 30s, or beyond, we have spent decades building an identity.
An identity of being capable.
Yes. Capable, professional, knowledgeable in our specific lanes.
So to sit down at a piano and literally struggle to play Mary Had a Little Lamb.
It's a massive threat to that self-concept.
I see.
So rather than confront the intense discomfort of incompetence, the brain invents a biologically sounding excuse.
I'm too old. My brain can't learn this.
Exactly. If it is framed as a physical impossibility dictated by the passage of time, then you cannot be blamed for failing.
Wow.
The ego remains intact, safe, and completely stagnant.
It's like sitting in the driver's seat of your car, violently pulling up the parking brake, pressing the gas pedal, and then complaining to everyone walking by that the engine is fundamentally broken.
That is a great analogy.
Like, you are the one who engaged the brake. But if 28 is viewed through this lens of restriction as too old, I mean, it begs the question.
What does that make 40?
Right, or 60. It reveals that too late is entirely a psychological state, not a biological reality.
Absolutely.
But I want to push back on this a little bit, or, at least play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
If 28 is objectively young, and we know our brains are highly capable of learning at that age, what are the actual specific environmental or psychological triggers that make a healthy, capable adult genuinely believe their window has slammed shut?
To understand that trigger, we really have to look at the evolutionary origins of the comparison trap.
Okay, evolutionary origins.
Humans are fundamentally tribal, highly social primates, right? For hundreds of thousands of years, our survival literally depended on understanding exactly where we stood in the social hierarchy of our tribe.
Because if you fell too far behind.
You were quite literally left for the predators.
Wow.
So we evolved this hypersensitive psychological radar for measuring our progress against the people immediately around us.
Right. Checking to make sure we're keeping up.
The problem is that our modern environment has totally hijacked this ancient survival mechanism.
Because of the internet.
Yes. Today, you aren't just comparing yourself to the 50 people in your hunter-gatherer tribe.
No, not at all.
Because of global media and algorithmic sorting, you are constantly subjected to the extreme outliers of human achievement.
Oh, man. Yeah. You look at a 22-year-old tech billionaire on your feed.
Or a 19-year-old Olympic prodigy.
And your ancient brain registers that as the baseline for the tribe.
Exactly. It thinks, oh, this is what normal is now.
So we are auditing our own lives against a statistically impossible standard.
And we inevitably find ourselves coming up catastrophically short.
Always. Every time.
You are comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20.
Or even their chapter 50.
Right. You are looking at their heavily curated, highly polished outcome and placing it side by side with your messy, uncertain beginning.
Which is so unfair to do to yourself.
It is. And this cognitive distortion inevitably leads to that sinking feeling captured perfectly in the idiom. The ship has sailed.
Oh, the ship has sailed. I hate that phrase.
It implies the opportunity has permanently left the port and you are just standing alone on the dock.
Right.
And holding on to that specific belief is incredibly dangerous because it initiates a brutal cognitive loop.
The self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Exactly, the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Let's break down the mechanics of that prophecy for you listening, because I think understanding the internal wiring is the only way you can actually diffuse it.
It starts with establishing the baseline negative belief.
Which is, it is too late for me to achieve this.
Right. And once that belief is firmly established in the psyche, it completely dictates your behavior.
How so?
Well, the brain is an incredibly efficient energy-saving organ. If it genuinely believes an outcome is impossible, it will aggressively shut down any expenditure of energy toward that goal.
Because why burn calories trying to catch a ship that is already over the horizon?
Precisely. So the behavior logically becomes inaction.
You don't buy the piano.
You don't sign up for the language class.
You don't write the first page of the novel. You just stay put.
Which mathematically guarantees you will never learn to play the piano.
Yeah, zero chance.
And here is the most insidious part of the cycle.
What's that?
Your brain then observes the lack of change in your life and uses it as empirical evidence to validate the original false belief.
Oh, wow. So the brain looks around a year later, sees no piano skills, and says, aha, I told you so.
I knew it was too late. Look, absolutely nothing happened.
That is wild. The outcome falsely validates the initial fabricated belief.
Yes. You have actively engineered your own failure by simply believing failure was inevitable.
You built the cage, locked yourself inside, and then pointed to the bars as proof that you couldn't be free.
It's a perfect tragic loop.
Okay, I hear that, and I agree. But let me challenge the scope of this just a little bit.
Sure.
We are talking about human potential as if it is completely boundless, but we do live in a physical reality.
We do.
If I am 45 years old and I suddenly decide my life's ambition is to become an Olympic gymnast, well, the ship actually has sailed.
Yes, it has.
Biologically, my joints and fast-twitch muscle fibers will not allow it. So where do we draw the line between toxic, self-limiting beliefs and just healthy, grounded realism?
That is a crucial distinction. The key is separating the essence of your desire from the specific culturally defined manifestation of that desire.
Okay, essence versus manifestation. Explain that.
Yes, the specific manifestation of being a gold medal Olympic gymnast at 45 is a biological impossibility.
Right.
However, we have to interrogate the essence of the goal. Why do you want to be an Olympic gymnast?
Is it a desire for elite physical mastery?
Or is it a craving for the discipline of daily training? Is it the thrill of performance?
Oh, I see.
Those underlying essences are absolutely still accessible.
Right. You can become a master of a different martial art.
You can achieve profound physical flexibility through advanced yoga. You can even enter adult gymnastics competitions.
The trap is believing that because one highly specific youth-dependent door is closed, the entire house is locked.
Exactly. The reality is that the architecture of human potential is vast.
That completely reframes that ship has sailed idiom. It's not about denying that a specific ship left the port.
No.
It's realizing that life isn't a tiny rural airport with one single final departure for the week. It is a massive global harbor.
Yes, it is.
The source text offers a brilliant counter-argument. There is always another vessel to board.
Always another vessel.
If you miss the specific vessel of being a child piano prodigy, the vessel of being a highly skilled, deeply fulfilled adult amateur musician is boarding right now at the next dock.
It shifts the entire paradigm from scarcity to abundance.
It really does. But, to truly shatter the too late mindset, theoretical metaphors about ships and harbors aren't enough.
No, people need proof.
We need tangible, undeniable historical evidence of people who boarded entirely new vessels late in their chronological timelines.
And the research highlights two highly celebrated, globally recognized figures who did exactly that.
Harlan Sanders, universally known as Colonel Sanders, and Vera Wang.
Both achieved their defining success remarkably late in life.
Let's look closely at Sanders first, because the reality of his timeline is just staggering.
It really is.
He was not a young, visionary entrepreneur operating out of a Silicon Valley garage.
Not even close.
He spent the vast majority of his adult life cycling through a relentless series of painful, failed jobs and ventures.
He was a farmhand, an insurance salesman, a ferry boat operator.
Tire salesman.
Right.
And he didn't launch the Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise model until he was 62 years of age. 62. Most people in their early 60s are actively winding down, picking out retirement communities, and he is laying the foundation for a multi-billion-dollar global empire.
It completely upends our expectations of aging and productivity.
And then let's consider the trajectory of Vera Wang.
Another phenomenal example.
Her early life was defined by elite competitive figure skating.
Yes, she dedicated her youth to reaching the Olympics.
And when she didn't make the team, she faced a profound identity crisis.
Naturally.
She then pivots into fashion journalism, working as an editor for decades.
Decades in publishing.
And she did not design her first world-renowned wedding dress, the very art form she is universally famous for today, until she was 40 years old.
40 years old?
The sheer contrast in Vera Wang's story is what I find so compelling.
How do you mean?
Moving from the ice rink, which is a brutally demanding, highly specialized physical world, to the absolute pinnacle of haute couture design.
It's a massive pivot.
It completely obliterates the notion that you are permanently locked into the character sheet you rolled in your 20s.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
But society tends to look at these figures and completely misinterpret their journeys.
Right. We suffer from the myth of overnight success.
We absolutely do.
Yeah.
When society looks at Colonel Sanders or Vera Wang, they only see the final polished outcome.
They see the global brand.
Exactly. They completely ignore the invisible decades of agonizing pivots, brutal failures, and foundational learning that preceded the visible triumph.
Right.
When we look at Sanders' decades of failed venture selling tires, running a failed motel, we tend to categorize those years as wasted time.
Because he didn't make any money doing them.
Exactly. But biologically and psychologically, they were the exact opposite. Those decades of failure were his hidden mandatory curriculum.
His hidden curriculum. Okay, what specifically was he learning in that curriculum? Because, let's be honest, selling tires doesn't naturally translate to frying chicken.
No, not the specific tasks, but he was learning the macro skills of human commerce.
Ah, I see.
He was learning supply chain logistics, the psychology of salesmanship. He was learning how to weather extreme rejection without losing his underlying drive.
And how to identify market demands.
Exactly. He was refining his legendary resilience. If you handed the KFC franchise model to Harlan Sanders at age 25, he likely would have destroyed it.
Because he didn't possess the psychological infrastructure yet.
Precisely. The failures built the infrastructure.
The curriculum of failure. I think that is a profoundly liberating concept for anyone listening to this deep dive right now.
It really reframes everything.
Yeah. If you are sitting there agonizing over the years you feel you've wasted in the wrong career or the wrong relationship or just feeling utterly lost,
You have not wasted a single second.
you have been unknowingly taking the prerequisite courses for whatever you're about to do next. You have been building the psychological infrastructure.
That's exactly right.
But let's ground this, because feeling inspired by the hidden curriculum of Colonel Sanders is a wonderful spark.
It is.
But inspiration without a functional mechanical strategy is just emotional entertainment.
It evaporates the moment you wake up the next morning.
Exactly. If you want to actually begin rewriting your timeline today, what are the literal mechanical steps from the source material?
The transition from inspiration to execution requires a highly logical, almost dispassionate framework.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The research lays out a 3-step mechanical strategy that is deliberately designed to bypass the brain's resistance to change.
Bypass the resistance, I like that.
Step 1 is the cornerstone. Define the objective with pinpoint, ruthless precision.
Let's define what we mean by precision, because I think most people think they have goals, but they actually just have vague wishes.
Right, like I want to be a healthier person, or I want to be more creative.
Yeah, those are wishes.
Exactly. Healthier and creative are highly subjective, ambiguous concepts. And the human brain handles ambiguity very poorly.
How so?
When you give the brain an ambiguous goal like get healthy, it immediately encounters a massive wall of cognitive load.
Because what does healthy mean?
Right. Does it mean keto? Does it mean running a marathon? Does it mean sleeping 8 hours?
The brain has to make 100 micro decisions just to figure out what the first step is.
And faced with that overwhelming cognitive load, the brain defaults to its favorite energy-saving strategy.
Doing nothing at all.
Exactly.
It's decision fatigue before you've even taken a single action.
Precisely. Ambiguous goals fail because they are fundamentally untrackable. And if you can't track it, you cannot be accountable to it.
Makes sense.
Precision eliminates the cognitive load. Instead of the vague desire to be healthier, the precise trackable goal is, I will walk outside for 30 minutes every single day at 7 a.m.
There is no ambiguity there. You either physically completed the action or you didn't.
Exactly.
Think of it like using a magnifying glass on a sunny day.
Okay.
If you just hold the glass up casually, the scattered sunlight simply passes through and pleasantly warms the pavement.
Right, nothing really happens.
The energy is diffused. But if you hold that magnifying glass at the exact right angle, stabilizing it to focus all of that scattered solar energy into one tiny, precise, blinding point of light.
You can start a roaring fire.
Yeah. Precision is the mechanism that concentrates your limited human energy for maximum physical impact.
That analogy perfectly captures the physics of behavioral change.
Thanks.
But once you have that hyper-focused point of precision, the natural instinct is to pour all your enthusiasm into a massive initial effort.
Oh, absolutely.
And that brings us to the second mechanical requirement, which actively subverts that instinct.
Which is?
You must start small. In fact, you must start significantly, almost embarrassingly smaller than you initially think you should.
This is deeply counterintuitive, especially in our culture. You know, we worship the go big or go home hustle mentality.
We do.
If someone finally decides to learn a new language, their instinct is to buy a massive textbook and commit to studying for 2 hours every single night.
And that instinct is exactly why they will quit by Thursday.
So true.
Massive, sweeping initial efforts trigger an immediate threat response in the brain's amygdala.
The amygdala sees it as a threat.
Yes. The amygdala perceives this sudden, massive disruption to your daily routine as a danger to your homeostasis.
Oh, wow.
And it will flood your system with resistance, fatigue, and procrastination to force you back into your comfortable baseline.
So your own brain is fighting your ambition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To circumvent the amygdala, you have to fly under its radar. You lower the barrier to entry so dramatically that your ego and your fear simply cannot find a logical excuse to say no.
So instead of 2 hours of language study, you commit to what, 5 minutes?
Exactly. You commit to 5 or 10 minutes of vocabulary practice while you are brewing your morning coffee.
Because 10 minutes is so undeniably microscopic that the brain doesn't register it as a threat.
Right. It is practically impossible to argue that you don't have time for 10 minutes.
Right.
This approach relies on the fundamental psychology behind the ancient fable of the tortoise and the hare.
We all know this story.
We do, but we misinterpret the lesson. The swift rabbit represents that burst of massive, highly motivated, but entirely unsustainable initial effort.
The rabbit sprints out of the gate, exhausts its glycogen stores, burns out, and falls asleep.
Exactly. While the tortoise represents the unstoppable power of small, unbreakable, daily momentum.
Slow and steady wins the race.
The tortoise never triggers a massive metabolic crisis. It simply never stops taking the next micro step.
It's the consistency that wins, not the intensity.
Exactly.
Which leads directly to the third and arguably most critical step of the mechanics. Do not wait for the perfect moment.
The perfect moment is a myth.
We are constantly bargaining with time, aren't we? We tell ourselves we will start the new diet on Monday.
Or we will finally write the screenplay after the holidays when things calm down.
Or look for a new job when the market improves.
The perfect moment is a seductive, paralyzing illusion. It is a psychological defense mechanism designed to indefinitely delay the vulnerability of starting.
Because the reality is that your life will never suddenly reorganize itself into a calm, friction-free runway for your new project.
Life is inherently chaotic, demanding, and unpredictable.
The research utilizes a brilliant proverb to neutralize this constant bargaining with time.
The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now.
The second best time is now.
Yeah.
There is such a profound grace in that statement because it completely neutralizes the toxic regret of procrastination.
It really does.
Yes, objectively, it would have been financially brilliant if you had started investing in your retirement account 20 years ago.
Sure.
But you didn't. That past timeline is entirely inaccessible. You cannot travel back there.
No, you can't.
Agonizing over the unplanted tree of the past only distracts you from the soil you are standing on today. The only literal point of power you possess in the universe is this exact present moment.
But this brings us to a much darker, far more complex psychological reality.
Okay, let's go there.
We have laid out a 3-step framework that is entirely logical. Be precise. Fly under the amygdala's radar by starting incredibly small. And execute the action today.
It is a highly manageable formula.
Yet, if we look at human behavior, millions of people still adamantly, stubbornly refuse to take step 1.
Why?
The underlying culprit preventing them isn't a lack of time, and it certainly isn't a lack of resources.
Then what is it?
The research makes a devastatingly accurate observation. The phrase, "it's too late," is almost always a socially acceptable, sophisticated euphemism for "I am deeply, profoundly scared to try."
Wow, that is a punch straight to the gut.
It is.
Admitting I'm scared to try requires a level of radical self-honesty that most of us spend our lives avoiding.
Because it forces you to confront your own fragility. People are terrified of the multifaceted nature of failure.
Right, they are terrified of the social embarrassment of appearing foolish to their peers.
But perhaps most tragically, they are terrified of the ultimate ego death.
The ego death of making a massive, genuine, concerted effort, giving it their absolute all. Yeah.
And still not succeeding.
Ooh. Because if you give 100% of your soul to a pursuit and you fail, you can no longer blame external circumstances.
No. You have to painfully confront your own sheer limitations.
So returning to the piano player declaring the instrument for the young is just an elaborate defense mechanism against that exact ego death.
Precisely. Inaction becomes a highly effective, albeit tragic, form of self-preservation.
It keeps you safe.
Let's look at the cold mathematics of it. By consciously choosing not to step onto the playing field, you mathematically eliminate the possibility of losing the game.
You guarantee your safety. No one will laugh at you, and you will never have to face your limit.
But the devastating trade-off is that you also guarantee your own stagnation. You artificially induce your own paralysis just to avoid a scrape on your knee.
But let me interrupt this train of thought for a second.
Sure.
Because I think we need to be careful about demonizing fear entirely. Biologically speaking, fear is an evolutionary masterpiece. It exists to keep the organism alive. How do we distinguish on a practical neurological level between the highly rational fear that prevents you from doing something genuinely dangerous, like jumping off a cliff or investing your life savings in a Ponzi scheme, and the entirely irrational fear that keeps you stuck in a soul-crushing job or prevents you from learning conversational Spanish?
That is exactly the distinction we need to make.
Yeah.
You have to look at the context of the threat the brain is processing.
Okay, the context.
Our human nervous system evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to protect us from literal, physical apex predators.
Saber-toothed tigers.
Exactly.
Huh?
It is a brilliant, highly tuned biological alarm system designed to flood your body with adrenaline and cortisol so you can run away.
Fight or flight.
The fundamental flaw in our modern hardware is that the brain often cannot distinguish between a physical threat to our biological life and a psychological threat to our social status.
Wait, really? So when you open up a new language learning app or you sit down to write a business plan, your brain is literally interpreting the potential for future social embarrassment with the exact same physiological alarm bells as encountering a predator in the jungle.
Yes. The physiological response, the elevated heart rate, the shallow breathing, the intense desire to flee is identical.
That explains so much.
The research emphasizes that the solution is not to fight the fear or to feel a deep sense of shame for experiencing it. You cannot logic your way out of a dialogical response.
You just have to accept it.
You must recategorize it. Acknowledge the fear as a completely normal physiological reaction to novelty.
It's exactly like the intense anxiety of the first day of kindergarten. Your nervous system is simply reacting to an unknown environment.
Exactly. The research explicitly references the foundational work of psychologist Susan Jeffers, and specifically the title of her famous book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway.
Feel the fear and do it anyway. The underlying assumption there completely shifts how we view bravery. It implies that fear isn't a giant red stop sign. It's simply a turbulent weather condition that you have to walk through.
It dismantles our greatest misconception about courage. We culturally believe that we must somehow cultivate courage before we take action.
Right, we sit around waiting to feel incredibly brave, assuming that once the bravery arrives, we will finally step onto the stage or launch the business.
But human neurobiology works in the exact reverse order.
Courage is not a prerequisite to action.
No, it is a byproduct of action. Courage is forged exclusively in the physical crucible of doing. It cannot be generated by overthinking in the comfortable safety of your living room.
You take the terrifying step, you survive the step, and your brain retroactively updates your identity to include courage.
Precisely. Action breeds courage.
That is a massive paradigm shift. But while we are deeply analyzing these internal emotional hurdles in neurobiology, we cannot ignore the external environment.
The environment is huge.
The research highlights a massive external factor that acts as a multiplier. It can either completely derail your internal progress or massively accelerate it.
Right. It's not just about what is firing inside your head. It's heavily dependent on who is existing in your immediate orbit.
We are talking about the environmental factor, specifically the concept of social contagion.
Human beings possess specialized brain cells called mirror neurons.
Mirror neurons, right.
Which are designed to subconsciously mimic the emotions, behaviors, and beliefs of the people around us.
It's how empathy functions, but it's also how limitations spread.
Exactly. The research emphasizes that the people surrounding you, your family, your closest circle of friends, your daily colleagues, exert an incredibly potent gravitational pull on your internal mindset.
You inevitably absorb the emotional and psychological baseline of the people you spend the most time with.
It's essentially psychological osmosis. If you are surrounded by cynicism, you become cynical.
Yeah. But the research makes a very subtle, highly observant point here. The danger isn't just the overtly toxic, openly negative people who actively try to drag you down.
No, those people are easy to spot and relatively easy to ignore.
The real danger often comes from incredibly well-meaning people who genuinely love you, but whose constant underlying refrain is, just stay safe.
Stay safe. It sounds so incredibly supportive on the surface, doesn't it?
It does. It sounds like they are throwing a protective blanket over you.
It does, which is precisely why it is so insidious and difficult to counter. If we decode the phrase, stay safe, within the context of radical personal growth, it is very often subconscious code for something much darker.
What does it actually mean?
What often translates to, don't dream too big because failure will hurt. Or don't take chances because the unknown is terrifying.
Oh, wow.
But most commonly it means, please don't change because your sudden growth forces me to confront my own comfortable stagnation.
Right.
When you start waking up early, working out, or building a new skill, it acts as a mirror reflecting their own inaction back at them.
Their plea for you to stay safe is often just a plea for you to stay exactly where you are so they don't feel left behind. Wow. That is an incredibly heavy realization. The people closest to you might subconsciously sabotage your growth just to preserve the familiar dynamic of the relationship.
It is a harsh reality of human dynamics.
Yeah.
If you truly want to transform your life, you're going to have to take calculated, courageous risks.
You cannot simultaneously stay safe in the harbor and discover new continents. Growth requires stepping into the unstable unknown.
Therefore, the research argues that you must consciously, actively, and sometimes ruthlessly curate your social circle.
Curate your circle.
You must purposefully insert yourself into networks of people who normalize the exact calculated risks you are terrified of taking.
It brings us right back to the analogy of the tree. Think about trying to plant that metaphorical tree we discussed earlier. If you take an incredibly strong seed with perfect genetics and you plant it in soil that is deeply toxic, heavily polluted, and entirely devoid of nutrients, it doesn't matter how much water you give it or how much sunlight hits it.
The hostile environment will slowly kill the organism.
You have to literally uproot and repot yourself into an environment that actually possesses the specific nutrients required for your growth.
You have to find a community of people who actually want to see you grow new branches.
Exactly.
And what's crucial to remember here, so the listener doesn't feel overwhelmed by the prospect of having to abandon their entire friend group, is that you do not need an entire army of cheering supporters to initiate this change.
Oh, that's a relief.
The research emphasizes the power of singularity. Even one deeply supportive person can alter your entire trajectory.
One friend who holds you accountable.
One experienced mentor, a teacher, or even a highly engaged niche community on the internet dedicated to the specific skill you're trying to learn.
Just one voice of encouragement countering your internal chorus of fear is often enough to tip the scales toward action.
Exactly.
That is incredibly reassuring. You don't need a stadium of fans. You just need one solid anchor.
Right.
And surrounding yourself with the right environmental inputs helps you stay the course when the initial motivation inevitably fades.
Because it will fade.
Which brings us to a major, necessary reality check from our research. Real, genuine life transformation looks absolutely nothing like it does in the movie.
It doesn't. We have a fundamentally warped cultural expectation of what change feels like.
We absolutely do. The research explicitly targets and dismantles what we can categorize as the Hollywood myth of change.
The montage.
Yes. In cinema, transformation must be visually compelling, so it is always depicted as a grand, sweeping gesture.
The protagonist suffers a massive upheaval. They hit absolute rock bottom. A dramatic, swelling orchestral track begins to play.
We get highly stylized 3-minute training montage.
And they wake up the very next scene in a completely reinvented reality.
We have been totally conditioned to expect the montage.
It's ruined us.
We subconsciously believe that if we just find the right spark of motivation, we will enter a fugue state of hyperproductivity and emerge 3 weeks later with a six-pack, a new master's degree, and a perfectly balanced life.
And when that doesn't happen by Tuesday, we think we are broken.
Right. That is a tragedy of the montage myth. In reality, as the research plainly states, small things add up.
That is the unglamorous fundamental physics of transformation. We have to look deeply at the concept of compounding actions.
Changing your life is usually incredibly, painfully mundane in the present moment.
It's boring.
There is no sweeping soundtrack.
It is no soundtrack at all. Meaningful change looks like waking up exactly 15 minutes earlier when the house is still dark and cold.
It looks like choosing to read one single chapter of a dense book on a Sunday afternoon instead of mindlessly scrolling through social media for 3 hours.
It looks like setting up an automated transfer of just $20 a week into an index fund and never looking at it.
These actions feel entirely insignificant in isolation.
They do.
But meaningful change is a worthwhile endeavor precisely because it requires sustained, microscopic effort that accumulates silently and invisibly over months and decades.
The research uses the mechanics of adult language acquisition as the perfect prime example of this compounding effect.
Language learning, right?
If you look at an entire foreign language from the outside, thousands of unfamiliar vocabulary words, utterly complex and contradictory grammar structures, entirely new phonetic sounds, it genuinely feels like an insurmountable, impossible mountain to climb.
Oh yeah, completely overwhelming.
But if you strip away the mountain and just focus on 10 minutes a day of learning 3 new phrases, that effort compounds.
The brain slowly builds new neural pathways.
Over 12 or 18 months, those isolated 10-minute blocks fuse together into actual spontaneous fluency.
And suddenly, through no grand gesture whatsoever, you possess the extraordinary ability to travel across the world and have a deep conversation in a language you didn't even understand a year ago.
The final result is monumental. But every single daily action that built it was microscopic.
So this raises a massive behavioral question for me.
Go for it.
If the secret formula truly is just small compounding steps, and those steps are so objectively manageable, do you think the primary reason people fail to reach their goals isn't actually a lack of ability, but simply sheer agonizing boredom?
Yes.
Do they quit before the compounding effects have a chance to breach the surface and become visible?
I think boredom and the modern need for instant gratification are the primary assassins of human potential.
The assassins of potential.
We exist in a highly engineered, dopamine-driven society. Every app on our phone is designed to give us immediate, visible feedback the second we take an action.
Likes, retweets, notifications.
We have lost the psychological endurance for delayed results. When you execute that 10-minute daily habit, say walking on a treadmill for 30 minutes on a Tuesday, you step off, look in the mirror, and you look absolutely identical to how you looked on Monday. But your brain interprets this lack of immediate visible visual feedback as a total failure of the process.
Right.
You enter what behavioral psychologists call the valley of disappointment, where your effort hasn't yet produced visible results.
The valley of disappointment.
That is the exact moment people abandon the compounding process. They mistake invisible progress for zero progress.
Which is exactly why relying purely on raw motivation is a losing game. Motivation gets you to buy the treadmill. A structured framework keeps you walking on it through the valley of disappointment.
Exactly.
And our research delivers a fantastic, highly pragmatic roadmap for exactly this. It directly addresses the listener no matter what specific timeline or stage of life they are currently navigating.
It breaks it all down.
Let's break down this timeline analysis because it systematically destroys the too late excuse at every single decade. Let's start with the 20s.
Let's start with the foundational years. If you are in your 20s and you are experiencing the panic of feeling behind your peers, the research provides a definitive reality check.
You are not behind.
You are not behind. You have barely crossed the starting line. You are standing at the absolute precipice of your adult life.
You have the immense, unrecoverable luxury of time to experiment, to fail spectacularly, to make entirely wrong career choices, and to completely correct your course without long-term structural damage.
You are just beginning.
Okay, but the panic usually intensifies as we age. What if the listener is deeply entrenched in their 30s?
If you're in your 30s, you are still remarkably biologically young. Neuroscientists note that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for long-term planning and complex decision-making, has only recently fully matured.
Oh, interesting. So you are not a finished product. Your life is actively unfolding.
Exactly. You have gathered enough real-world data to know what you don't want, which is incredibly valuable. And you still possess decades of prime energy to execute what you do want.
The ship is still very much in the harbor.
Still there.
And what about the 40s and 50s? Because culturally, this is the exact era where the midlife crisis hits and the too late panic calcifies into deep regret.
And this is precisely the moment when you must aggressively remind yourself of the historical evidence we discussed earlier.
Vera Wang and Colonel Sanders.
Right. You list directly at them. The 40s and 50s are absolutely not the end of the road. Developmental psychologists view them as the era of peak synthesis.
Peak synthesis.
Yes, this is the stage where you finally have the capacity to take decades of varied, seemingly disconnected life experiences, failures, and skills, and combine them into a singular, highly focused, powerful new direction.
You finally have the psychological infrastructure to build the empire.
Exactly.
And for those listening who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond, society so often pushes this demographic to the invisible margins.
The research is profoundly beautiful and assertive regarding this stage of life. It reminds us that if you are in these later decades, you possess a profound, irreplaceable wealth of lived experience and crystallized wisdom that younger generations simply cannot access.
And most importantly, you still have the gift of time. You have time to pursue pure novelty without the pressure of building a resume. You have time to find deep, unadulterated joy and to uncover entirely new purposes that simply weren't accessible or relevant to you in the chaos of your youth.
Because the human capacity for neuroplasticity, for joy, and for radical reinvention simply does not have a biological expiration date.
I absolutely love the radical, aggressive inclusivity of that breakdown. It actively hunts down the too late excuse and systematically dismantles it, no matter what demographic or decade you happen to fall into.
It strips away every possible alibi for inaction.
So to wrap all of this dense psychological theory and historical evidence into something the listener can physically, literally execute as soon as this audio stops playing, the research provides a brilliantly simple, actionable daily framework.
A micro-routine.
Yeah, a micro-routine meticulously designed to hack your brain's dopamine system and force that compounding effect we talked about.
It is wonderfully straightforward and demands incredibly little of your time, which is why it works. It is divided into 3 distinct phases: morning, day, and evening.
Let's look at the morning phase. It requires a maximum of 2 minutes of your time.
2 minutes. Before you check your phone, before the chaos of the day infects your mind, you identify one singular focus or one incredibly small thing to improve.
Not a sweeping to-do list of 20 items that will just induce cognitive load.
No, one single trackable thing. Today, I will take 10 deep breaths before responding to a stressful email. Or today, I will drink exactly 1 extra glass of water at lunch.
The power of that is the singularity. One focus completely prevents decision fatigue before the day even officially starts. You know exactly what the mission is.
And then we move into the day phase.
During the day phase, your only overarching obligation to this framework is to simply take that one small incremental action toward the singular focus you set in the morning.
That is the entirety of the requirement. It could take 30 seconds of your day. It could take 5 minutes. You execute the action, and then you move on with your life.
And finally, we arrive at the evening phase, which honestly, based on the neurobiology we've discussed, I think is secretly the engine that drives the entire framework.
It absolutely is the engine. In the evening, right before sleep, you take a brief moment to reflect.
Right.
And if you successfully took that one microscopic step during the day, you must actively, consciously celebrate the victory.
However minuscule it is.
However utterly silly it feels to mentally high-five yourself for drinking a glass of water or reading 2 pages of a book, you must consciously give yourself credit for the execution.
Why is that specific forced evening celebration so neurologically critical to the process of transformation?
Because it is the mechanism that actively engineers a positive feedback loop in the brain's reward center. When you consciously acknowledge a success, no matter how small, your brain releases a microdose of dopamine.
Dopamine.
Dopamine is not just the pleasure chemical. It is the molecule of motivation and behavioral reinforcement.
Yeah.
By triggering that dopamine release, you are chemically wiring your brain to crave the repetition of that behavior tomorrow.
Wow.
But on a much deeper psychological level, over months of repeating this daily celebration, a profound shift occurs.
What's the shift?
You slowly, imperceptibly stop seeing yourself as a static individual who can't change, and you begin to internalize an entirely new identity. You become someone who keeps their promises to themselves.
You literally build an unbreakable foundation of self-trust. It's an incredible mechanism.
It really is.
Okay, what an absolute journey this has been today. We have covered a massive amount of psychological, historical, and neurological ground.
We really did.
To rapidly recap the core mechanics of this deep dive so you can carry them forward. First, you have to ruthlessly recognize and interrogate your own self-limiting narratives. You have to let go of the evolutionary comparison trap.
Remember that the idiom, "the ship has sailed," is a toxic myth. The harbor is full, and there is always another vessel waiting for you to board.
Remember that your chronological age is simply a metric of time, not a metric of capacity. It is not your destiny.
Remember the raw mechanics of change. Define your objective with pinpoint precision to eliminate cognitive load.
Start significantly smaller than your ambition dictates so you can fly under your brain's fear radar. And do not wait for the illusion of the perfect moment, because the absolute second best time to plant the tree is right now.
And crucially, when the biological alarm bells ring, recognize what they are, feel the fear, acknowledge the discomfort of the unknown, and do it anyway. Understand that action is the only forge that creates courage.
Curate your social circle to protect your fragile near habits from the crab mentality of others, and place your absolute trust in the invisible, undeniable physics of small, compounding actions.
Small things add up.
As we finally wrap up this deep dive today, we want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over. Something to carry with you as you step out of this intellectual space and back into the messy reality of your own timeline.
I want you to think deeply about this reframing of your past. What if the years you have spent agonizing, feeling utterly stuck, or feeling like you were definitively too late weren't actually wasted time at all?
What if, exactly like Colonel Sanders' invisible decades of brutal early failures, those frustrating years were simply the necessary hidden curriculum?
What if every setback was just mandatory coursework designed to build the exact psychological infrastructure you needed to endure the small step you were going to take today?
Think about the weight of that. All that time wasn't a delay, it was preparation. So whatever that one incredibly small step is for you, whether it's downloading the language app right now, or finally lacing up your walking shoes, or swallowing your pride and signing up for that beginner's piano lesson at age 28 or 48 or 88, we encourage you to take it today.
The scale of human potential is not broken. You just have to be willing to step onto it.
Thank you for spending your time and your focus with us today. Take your step.